So basically in life, and this is a psychological truth, is that there are two fears, right? Two fears in life. One is the fear of social embarrassment and, sort of public speaking, feeling naked, all that stuff. And then the other one is the fear of death. And I could just imagine, like, during that moment, especially since you've been going through probably a stage of denial, right? You thought it was all symbolic and it wasn't your son that was dying. I could imagine you felt some sort of existential terror, right? Some sort of existential fear, and especially your son was experiencing the same thing. But it seems like you are able to experience it with lightheartedness now, right? Like, it's not, death isn't as bad as it seemed. So sort of explain, why it isn't as bad as it seemed and why this isn't really the worst thing in the world to experience death.
No, it isn't. And if we experience death from the Western worldview, that there's nothing but matter, we are a fluke of nature, we just happened to come into being. There's no meaning, there's no purpose, and when you're dead, you're dead. That is a very destructive worldview. And if that is what we believe, we can do nothing but have terror and horror. I mean, because when the person dies, that's it. Someone we've loved for years in the deepest possible way, then it's like gone and you'll never see that person again. And most of the people I knew felt that way. And I didn't know, but all my life I was trying to find out, what is the truth of this? What did my ancestors experience? If today in this culture, we have hard time experiencing anything. And that's why I went to Peru. I thought, and I did have experiences, but it wasn't until Pishti died. And it's interesting. I think we were prepared on an unconscious level for his death, because it's somehow or other, it's as though I knew as I was going through this, I didn't know whether he would live or die, but I knew that there was something much larger taking place. And another vision I would say of my husband is when Pishti was in intensive care. And one evening, the doctor came to us and said, he's in a critical place. He may die within the hour. There are two things we can do. We're doing that now, but he could die within the hour. So we had people were all over the place. They were in their own places. And Istvan and I stood outside the ICU, and I reached down to take his hand. And when I did, I felt like an electric current just absolutely jumped through my body. And I looked at him and I thought, my God, is he going to have a heart attack or what? And I looked at him, he looked so intense. Usually he was the one who comforted me, but I then said, Istvan, if we're asked to do this, we can do it. Mm-hmm. And later he told me what he had experienced. He said, I was like in the most chaotic place. I was sure he was going to die. And he said, I thought I would have a heart attack. I thought I would explode. And then he said, and then suddenly all of that energy just went into images. And he said, I saw Pishti standing on the small mountain by Huayna Picchu in Peru. He'd never been there. I had, but he knew the geography of it pretty well, I guess. And he said, Pishti was standing on that small mountain. He was reaching with his left hand up toward the heavens and looking that way, and handing down with his right hand to Istvan. And he said, I didn't know whether he would live or die, but I did know that there was no difference really between it, because I knew that the love that we had connected us, and that could never be dissolved. I knew that we were connected with that love. Yeah.
I feel bittersweet about that. That makes me feel bittersweet, because on one hand, you could say, if you never truly die, right? If it doesn't matter whether or not Istvan was alive or dead, then it doesn't matter if he's alive at the same time, like why what does it mean for him to be birthed if it doesn't matter if he dies? Do you sort of...
Yeah, wait a second. Let's just walk that back a little bit. It, of course, does matter very much in the sense of, that here is a father and a mother and a son who's 20 is really about ready to go out into the world,
Yeah, of course.
and live his life. It mattered deeply to us, of course, and that was the whole feeling that we were in, is that we cannot. How could we let this child go? And yet, what István experienced, the father István experienced, was that the love is so profound, and that consciousness of the son is still living, that whether his body died or he lived, that consciousness, that essence of who we are was alive. And he knew that he would never lose that. That connection was there. And so, yes, it is important. We come into the world, I think, for very important reasons and purposes. And we play those out the best we can. Of course, it's not going to be exactly, because we're playing with everybody else and they're going to make their choices, And it's a great game of creativity and purpose, of achieving something and experiencing and becoming a conscious, experiencing all that we can of this vast universe. And how well can we create games that we play together? It's very, very important. But if their destiny is the time for them to step out, István realized he could let the body go, because he could never be separated from Pishti, because they loved each other. And I think this is what we experience in altered states of consciousness, is that love is the essence out of which we're born. It is that universal consciousness out of which we are born and to which we return. But we will create many games and many worlds. But it's the love that is the glue that holds us together and makes it meaningful, makes it purposeful.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm starting to understand this whole philosophy, and I can't even call it a philosophy, because it seems to be so much larger than that. Yeah. But, it seems to be an experience. But one of the things that I find, and you talk a lot about altered states of consciousness, and Huxley, Doors of Possession, right? Doors of Perception, all of these things. I noticed that this is the big problem in just life in general, is that we seem to be living in sort of a controlled consciousness, sort of a restricted consciousness. And for example, right, it would be so narrow-minded to say that because your son died, he died, right? Like, that's logical, it's rational, it's, well, shallow, right? But then if you open up the valve a little more, which Huxley did with psychedelics, which shamans do with psychedelics, medicinal herbs, as well as, just meditation and understanding the world. If you open that up, it seems like this love is so present. So try to help explain sort of what that all is.
Mm-hmm. Well, Huxley is a good example, because he talked about the valve, which I think he got from Bergson, in which he said, we all are born into and live in this vast universal consciousness, or cosmic consciousness that gave us birth. We live in that. But as human beings, we have a valve in the brain, you might say, that limits the flow of that consciousness. It becomes just a stream that flows through so that we can live our everyday life. And Huxley knew that very well. And when he worked with psychedelics, then he realized he could experience that valve just releasing, and this flow, much larger stream, almost like a river, flowing through him. And so it's, the experience is, when you're experiencing it, it's like you always knew it. It's like, oh, yes, that's right. It's like it. But because that valve has been so tight, especially in our culture, we've forgotten it. And it's like, of course. And you realize the incredible love that this consciousness is, and how vast and creative it is. It's all of the people who experience it, they always say they just can't explain it. And it's true. It can't be explained, but everybody keeps trying. But the important thing is that we have the experience. And that is as important, even more important than the scientific understanding of it. But we live in a time right now, because of quantum physics, that scientists can explain how this consciousness exists as the universe and how we can experience it. But we need both. We have always needed both, the scientist and the experiencer.